section 10.1 is about the South, slavery, and cotton. As you can see here, we know with the South, it's hot and it's humid. It's really good for growing things. Things such as tobacco, cotton, rice, indigo, and sugar. So these are the 5 things that are going to prop up the agricultural South as it is. There is a very distinctiveness about the South. John C. Calhoun called slavery the most peculiar of all institutions. He will perpetuate the idea that individuals of color are lesser than white individuals, white Western European descendants. And because of this, few of the immigrants who come to the United States are going to settle in the South. A lot of them are coming from locations where oppression is a thing, so they're going to do their best to stay out of that situation. They're not going to move into it. Many of them are very much against the idea of slavery. There are these conflicting myths about the South. The South believes that they are both different and better than that of the North. That they have this moral superiority because they follow things that are specifically from the Bible. And so they're going to use this to promote who they are and their society as it is. They have an agrarian society, passion for hunting, guns, the military, really going to promote the idea of manly honor and that of pride. When it comes to the South, it's broke up into 3 distinct groups. The first one is your border states. This is Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware as well. Cotton doesn't grow well here because of the environment and because of the type of soil that we have in these areas. And then the upper South, this has cotton, large plantations, small farms in this area. Certain areas of it are not suited for growing cotton because some of it's mountainous. So in those areas, they do other things. But then in the deep South, this is the majority of the South. This is very cotton dependent. Your large plantations are here. Most of the slave population is centered in that of the deep South. And what is keeping the deep South so ingrained in what it is, and that is cotton. Cotton becomes king of the area. And cotton is also known as white gold. 40% of the nation's revenue is made through cotton production. From 1790 to 1860, cotton and slavery are going to rise together. The top crops of the day, cotton. 75% of all slaves are cotton pickers. Cotton is hand-picked, labor-intensive, so the cost of slaves is going to soar. Corn and sugar and tobacco also become other things that are grown in the South at that time, but not as much as cotton. And those areas that they could not grow a lot of things, such as cotton, they had livestock. And in these areas, you had hogs, horses, cattle. Those are going to really prop up the South as well. So it's not just cotton that's keeping it steady. There's a few things that is there. In the southern frontier, it's really known as the Cotton Belt. As soil is exhausted in the east, they're going to move more westward. We have what is known as the slave trail, where tobacco slaves will be sold south to cotton plantations. Over 2 million slaves will be moved into the deep South. And it is not a place that individuals wanted to go. They wanted to stay out of the deep South. They did not want to be sold into the deep South, because the further into the deep South they went, the more aggressive and the more cruel it seemed to be. In this frontier environment, violence and abuse is everywhere. Also, alcoholism and drunkenness is as well. So it's not a society that a lot of people are looking forward to go into. It is something that is quite unique in the way it is. With the spread of cotton, steamboats make the Mississippi River the Cotton Highway. Cotton equals half of all U.S. exports at that time. 2/3 of the richest Americans now live in the South. The status is judged by how many slaves you have and how much land you have. They see themselves truly as Southern nobility, much like that feudal structure of that pyramid where they're at the top, they're the king of their castle, and they have people who work for them, and then they're slaves at the bottom as the peasantry. The South will grow very dependent on cotton production. Great Britain gets basically 80% of the cotton that is grown in the United States because cotton is what kickstarts the Industrial Revolution. Southern men, in hopes to chase that, are going to accumulate vast amounts of debt to help with cotton expansion, either to purchase land, seed, or slaves themselves. So slavery is going to prop up cotton, and cotton's going to prop up slavery. So it's kind of that chicken and egg situation, which came first. When it comes to the South, there are 4 distinct groups, as you can see here. You have your planters. This is your purple wedge right here in this diagram. They own 20 or more slaves. 50% of the slave population is owned by these planters. Another 9.5%, this is your orange and yellow wedges. That is 6 to 20 slaves are owned by these individuals, 40% of the slave population in here. So 12.5% of the population of the South owns 90% of the slave population. The other 10% are owned by yeoman family farmers, so that's about 12.5% as well. So landowners, they have 1 to 5 slaves. So that's 25% of the population owns all of the slaves in the South. The other 75%, Southern whites, they didn't own any slaves, and the majority of them didn't own any property. They couldn't afford it. They're very poor, or they live in the mountains where they don't need slaves. So they are very self-sufficient and live on their own. So of these groups, a lot of them are going to look towards that 3% of the population that is like that Southern nobility, that seems to have all the wealth and all the control, and see how they do things. When it comes to women in the South, women should be subservient and compliant, oversee all household items, care for the sick, birthing children, operation of the dairy. Almost every plantation had a dairy on it. The wife was to love, honor, obey, and serve her husband. And to keep this as an institution, women were not really educated. Education was not something that they looked for women. Women should be examples of Christian morality, sexual purity. Men, however, could do just about anything they wanted. It's a very different standard for men. Society was very male dominated. It was very authoritarian in their attitude. Rape and physical abuse commonplace, and people just looked the other way. They considered it a family issue, not a public issue. When it came to non-planters, some jobs that you could have if you weren't a plantation owner, you could be a farmer, a tenant farmer. You could rent land out and farm that way. You could be an overseer, and they're going to really use cruelty as a way to control slaves themselves. And if you were a man that was black and you were a slave and you were older, you could become a driver. A driver kind of was that middleman between the overseer and the slave. So each driver would have a select group of slaves that they would be in charge of. And then they would report back to the overseer, who would talk to the plantation owner. So that hierarchy that I already talked about. When it comes to the Pine Barren folk, most Southern white population falls here. They're mostly illiterate. Education, very low priority. They're barely self-sufficient. So they're very much living just to get by. Just like the peasantry of the medieval period. They're doing everything they can just to make it, because they're not given opportunities otherwise. Women worked in the fields as well. They're going to have lots of children. The average amount of children that the poor in the South at that time was 10. They're going to identify with the Democrats in support of slavery. The poor, some of them were called hillbillies because they lived up in mountain regions. And they lived on what was considered undesirable land because cotton couldn't grow there. And then also poor would be tenant farmers or renters. So you would like rent land from the plantation owner, and then you would have to give part of your crop to the plantation owner. So these individuals were everywhere. And the idea was perpetuated onto them that they are better than slaves. Because they're not enslaved, they are better. And they're going to hold this attitude for quite a long time. There are still individuals in our country, racist individuals, who still believe this because they have white skin, they are better. And that's all from this time period, this point where that idea is perpetuated. When it comes to profitability in the South, slave management is number one. The idea was they are told to treat them like animals. Do not treat them like human beings. If you treat them like human beings, you might care for them. So don't treat them that way. Don't think of them that way. Ultimately, it just all comes down to money. This was a product that they were trying to sell. It didn't matter that they were human beings. They were trying to tell themselves that that they weren't human, and it allowed them to feel better about the institution of slavery. Slavery sales is the quickest way to make money in the South. It's going to rise. The slave population is going to rise from 1790, about 700,000, to 1860. We have over 4 million individuals who are enslaved in the United States. Children will gain the status of their mother, like I've said before. So this helped build the slave population. All right. When it came to free persons of color, vulnerable, in constant fear that they are going to be taken and sold into the South. Most free blacks are going to choose to stay within cities, remain in safe groups, remain with themselves, with only black society. They're not viewed as equal to white society anywhere in the United States, even in the North, where abolitionism was key. In South Carolina, they're going to force individuals who are free to pay a tax just for being free. And then, also, they're not allowed to leave the state. They have to carry paperwork identifying who they are, what state they're from. So then if they're stopped and they produce their paperwork and they're outside of South Carolina, they will be taken back to South Carolina. Many of them are going to learn very early on skilled trades. So that's your blacksmith, your carpenter, that kind of thing. All those papers that I had you guys write at the beginning of the semester. So that is part of who they are. And this is going to help them when they do escape to establish themselves and get money to earn a living on after slavery is over. So the next thing you're going to do is move on to 10.2, Life as a Slave.